That's kind of impossible for me to answer.
Steven Rinella is the face of modern day hunting in the United States. With his net worth, reality TV career, books, and business, it would be pretty difficult to find a better wildlife expert, or so he wants you to think. But how real is his TV show? And is Steven actually a wilderness expert? You're not going to believe some of the things that people are saying about Steven. Steven has been the host of MeatEater since its first episode aired back in January 2012. MeatEater is Steven's hunting reality TV show that follows him around the world on hunting expeditions. Steven has been to several states in the US to hunt different wildlife like antelopes in New Mexico and elks in Kentucky. And it doesn't just end there. Steven has also been to New Zealand to hunt the red stag. But over the years, there have been questions about how real the show is, which makes sense because there are several reasons to ask this question. Firstly, MeatEater is a reality TV show, and we all know that when it comes to reality TV, it's not always as it seems. I mean, at the end of the day, most of the people involved in reality TV are eventually just in it for the money and fame. And to keep getting this money and fame, they start adding things just for drama. And you would think that hunting reality TV would be different. But there have been several instances when a hunting reality TV series made something up, especially The Catch. For instance, some people pointed out some fake scenarios in an episode of Larissa Unleashed, which is another hunting reality TV show. Apparently, Larissa made a poor shot at an elk with a bow and arrow, and the arrow just barely got to the top of the back of the elk. Then the camera cut to their guide in New Mexico, who was shocked that the elk did not go down from just one shot to the top of its back. And then they continued to trail the animal, and eventually they found an animal that had been shot down. The only issue is that it was a different, bigger elk, but that doesn't stop them from celebrating it as their own achievement. But considering that a lot of people who watch hunting reality TV shows have some experience with hunting themselves, it was easy for the viewers to see that it was a different animal. And people have pointed out similar things about MeatEater. While on the show, Steven has displayed some antics that a lot of fans have questioned over the years. I mean, you would think that after maybe like 6 years and 6 seasons of the show, he would have the basics down. Even though Steven often hunts different wildlife, the basics are usually more or less the same. With the constant hunting for all those years, if Steven was actually doing all of the hunting himself, maybe there would be fewer mistakes, especially for the pro hunter he claims to be. Now, that being said, Steven himself has said that he is not the best hunter and doesn't see himself as the best hunter. And since he's only human, he is bound to make mistakes, which I guess is a good point, and it actually makes MeatEater seem a little more real. Because with Steven in charge of the editing, he could just as easily edit out most of the mistakes he makes, but he lets them make the final cut, which seems pretty real. But on the other hand, we might only be seeing the mistakes Steven allows us to see. And another thing that Steven does that has some people feeling like he is trying to deceive his viewers is his popular mantra. According to Steven, he lives to hunt and hunts to live. But while this may have been true in the earlier seasons of MeatEater, it's just not the same so many seasons later. I mean, Steven doesn't really need to hunt to live anymore. It's definitely not a 9-to-5 that Steven can't do without. Between his several books and his merchandise sales, Steven can definitely live comfortably without having to hunt, and which his supposed net worth being somewhere around a couple $1 million. Well, he's definitely not struggling these days, but someone getting into MeatEater would think that hunting is Steven's only or main source of income, which just isn't true anymore. But in a less literal way, Steven does still hunt to live, and it's not in the way you think. Steven has a pretty strict rule in his house and for his family. Apparently, Steven and his family only eat meat that he hunted. According to Steven, food is just way too processed nowadays, including meat, which is why he prefers to get his own. But since Steven is usually out hunting, that means that there is often a lot of meat available. So even the cooking that Steven does after all the hunting doesn't come anywhere close to using up all the meat. And Steven is very big on not wasting anything and helping preserve the wildlife and their habitat. In fact, Steven has shared that if it wasn't for the aspect of food, hunting wouldn't be as interesting to him as it is now. Although with that being said, Steven's sentiment could easily have changed over the years with so many things now involved in his hunting. But those are not the only things that seem fishy about Steven, and this next one became quite obvious on Steven's podcast. He started a podcast about his hunting expeditions because apparently having a reality TV show and several books about it doesn't really cover it all. Steven calls the podcast the Meat Eater Podcast, and what's interesting is that he seems like such a chill, cool, laid-back person in front of the cameras. But when the cameras are off and it's just the mics that are on, Steven comes across kind of different. Some people have pointed out that his podcast seems to be more about him trying to stroke his own ego than passing on information or spreading a message. It's almost like he just really loves the sound of his own voice. And this even happens when the podcast has a special guest. Steven just talks to whoever his co-host is at the time, and this drags on for some time before they finally introduce the special guest for that episode. At least with Meat Eater, you get to see the whole expedition or whatever makes it on air with Steven as the host. But on the podcast, it just seems like Steven is trying to remain the sole main character, which is quite off-putting and very different from the Steven we see on camera, because Steven on Meat Eater seems to enjoy the company of his friends on the expedition without unnecessarily attracting attention to himself. But on the podcast, it seems like Steven just wants to talk over everyone, and he directs most of the conversation his way. It makes you wonder which is the real Steven, the one hogging all the attention off camera, or the chill person on camera that just wants to catch the animal he came out for. And if his real self is his podcast persona, then that's just another way in which this show is kind of fake. Maybe he's just being all chill and friendly because of the reality TV show aspect. But who knows? We obviously can't be sure either way. Still, I'd love to know what you guys think. Which do you think is the real Steven? Do you think his TV persona is more authentic, or is his podcast behavior closer to how he is in real life? Do you like Meat Eater? Do you think the show is real, or is it more fake than we realize? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below.